So you know what? Because it's only the 20 of us, and I know every one of you, we don't even have to do this session. We can do whatever we want. So we'll start to show you the stuff we have. If you want to go off on a tangent, it's fine with me. Greg, it's fine with you. We can talk about anything. So, but I'll show you what I had prepared. I have about 10 minutes worth of stuff. I left Greg the last 50 minutes because he loves to talk. So, I'm going to fire up Wakanda and actually fire up the project for my paid time off application. I have, and you know what? Let me see if I can get this server. I was running another server. Loading up the solution. And I just want to see if I got everything good here. Presentation, demo, responsiveness, demo, init. Okay. Lesser known features. Sweet. Okay. Let's go. So, I know to a lot of you, everything about Wakanda is a lesser known feature, right? You've never seen any of it. But there are a few things that you don't use right away when you're building an application, but I have used, actually, of all these things, Greg's going to talk about some. This is not an extensive list, actually. Greg is going to show you about the progress bar and Canvas. At the time I did this slide, I just kind of put things. I'm going to show you right now system workers. So that's an API that was designed originally for the client side to give you threads, but they have them, Wakanda has them on the server. So you can put asynchronous like daemons, or you can put like a daemon thread on your server, and it can sit there and wait for communication. And I've used that in my PTO application, and I'll show you why I did it. And there's the mail object. I don't know, that doesn't sound right, the mail object. I think the mail library, that sounds better. I saw a lot of you, a few of you guys get excited about that, so I don't know. Storage objects, that's on the server. HTTP request handlers. I use that in my PTO application, and so we'll talk about that. And then Greg has a bunch of other stuff to show you. So let's talk about workers. Wakanda uses web workers to provide you with multi-threading capability. A web worker is very easy to create. On server startup, you just reference a file that has the code for the web worker, and you can instantiate that, and I'll show you that. Oh, and I think I have more here. So the kind of worker, there's two types of workers: a dedicated worker that is just tied to one parent thread. But the more interesting one that I'm going to talk about today is a shared worker that can just be independent, and any of your request handlers can hit it. It just stays alive until you close it, and it can just sit there waiting for requests to do something. And I found a very good reason to use this in my PTO application. So before we actually look at the code, we'll talk about it a little bit. If you want to create a shared worker, you create a JavaScript file, and in the file, this is a function, onConnect function, that you create. And it will be passed in when somebody calls the shared worker. This message object will contain a port, and on port 0, you can listen for methods or messages from the different clients. You know what? It's a lot easier, and then to call it, you call it to create a new shared worker in any of your request handlers. You just you create a new shared worker object referencing the file. If it doesn't exist, it will create it, start it up for the first time, and if it already exists, it will just give you a reference to it. So after you've created that object, you look at the port property, and the port property has a post message function. So you know what? It's hard to see that, right? And let's just see it work.
So can your worker listen on all different ports?
I don't know about.
What you're sending a message of?
Yeah, I don't know that. You know, that's but that's internal on the server. It's not from outside. So there isn't the concept of a port outside. Let's take a look at it. I think that's the easiest way. So I have an example. So in this project on startup, I have created, where's my shared worker? I know it's, request handler. Wait a minute. Here's my email daemon. Is it down here? Greggy, yep. Request handlers. Okay, there it is. That's a request handler. That's not shared worker. Required scripts. No. I think I'm on startup. Oh, add request handler. Request handler. Okay, it's late in the day. Oh, you know what? Here it is. I didn't do it at startup. I took it out. You don't have to do it at startup. You can do it the first time you call it. So let's go look at the page. So I'll show you the code. Here is actually the folder, shared worker, and this is the code for the shared worker. Now this code won't, get placed into memory until you create a shared worker, but here's the code. So we'll go look at that later. I actually have an example. Initially, I had started my shared workers on startup, and then I changed it to just start them the first time somebody called it. So I'm going to find my example. Demo, I think this is it. Okay, that's it. So using a shared worker to improve application responsiveness. So I'm going to go, now I know what I'm doing. We are cooking with gas. So I'm going to go look at this page, and I think it's set up. So this page, when you create a new one of these, I don't know how to spell his name. When I create a new, I think this is a note, this is a preference table. When I create a new one of these, it's going to, see that? What it did is it stored the preference, and then it sent an email out. But as you noticed, that response was not the best. And so there is our email. You can see our preference. Greg McCarvell. I think I could make that. So there's our email that got sent out. And you can see our preference that we created. Now let's show that again before we go improve that. Because what was happening here, so when I hit the save, this is going back to the server. The server is going to save that entity, and it's going to send an email out. But right now I'm blocked. Well, that wasn't bad, but that still wasn't, that's still a little delay, and you can't control that. So what I did, let's go look at the code on the server and how we can use the shared worker to improve that. So if I go look at the model and preferences on save, here we go. Now we're cooking. I knew I'd. So in here right now, when we save a preference entity, I am creating and loading in the mail library. They got to change that. I just don't like saying that. And I'm creating a new mail object, and I'm doing the send, the send method, and I'm sending my mail. And that's how I got that piece of mail. But the send of the mail blocks the server. That library, however it's written, they got that from somewhere, but it blocks the server. So I found when I had that in PTO, you know, if the server's blocked, then of course the client's blocked waiting for the response. So we can use shared workers to improve this. So, and this is very simple. So now, what I'm doing, this is where that creating the shared worker is. I moved it. I could have put that in on startup and called it here again, but I just didn't. So now I'm creating the shared worker, which either will create the shared worker or give me a handle to the existing one. Because once you create it once, it's going to keep running. And we can look at that code in more detail, why it keeps running. Then once I create the shared worker, I get the port. And once I have the port, I can post a message. So I'm posting a message, and the shared worker has like a switch, because that shared worker gets called by a lot of different places. And this is where it will tell it where to drop into. And I'm passing, since I'm in the save, on save event for the preference, this will refer to my preference entity. So I'm sending the name and the value. And I'm sending that to the shared worker, and I'm having the shared worker send the email instead of sending the email directly from the on-save event. That means my on-save event will end right away. My response will go back to the browser, and then the shared worker will worry about sending that email. And I don't care how long that, if it takes a few seconds for the shared worker, the email will eventually go out, but my client will see his response when he hits the save button. The message comes back right away. So before we go look at that, let's go see the code in here. So if we look at this switch statement, here is the case for responsive applications. And you can see I sent in the what object. Who's on first? What? So you can see I have a what property and a name property. Anyway, that's part of the message. See, this object is the message that I'm posting to the shared worker. Where are you, shared worker? So basically, that same, you know, I create my mail instance and I do the send from here. So now let's look at the difference. And let me make sure, yeah, I think, did I save it? Let me make sure that I save this. Okay, that's saved. So, I don't even have to reload this. N-G-Y-U-N. How do you spell your last name, Tom? U-E-N. Okay, now, watch this. Instantaneous response to the user. That's the kind of response you like. Your user loves that. Our email still gets sent. There it is. That's the Dave Robbins. Where's Tom? Oh, there. I actually sent the one inside the shared worker to a different email address just to show. So that is, now, do you guys want to look a little more closely at the shared, I mean, that's how you can use the shared worker. It can just sit there, and it doesn't close until you can tell it to close. So that code will just wait for a message to come in. It will. Show us that code. Yeah. Let's do it. Let's look at it. So here is the shared worker. You know what? I think no, this is not. There it is. I'm going to make this a little smaller. Can I get this on my screen? There we go. I'm going to. If I take this a little smaller, can you still see it? Is that too small? Okay, so let's look at this from the top. So basically, now this is documented, but you want, in your shared worker, you want a function on connect, and a message object will be passed into it. That message, right here. I mean, I called it message. An object, when you call the shared worker, your object that you create, so let me show you this. That's an object. In fact, how how can I make this, whoop. Yeah, and in fact, this object here, it can be as complex as you want it to be. And that object will be passed to the shared worker. So back here, so we get that object. That object will have this ports property, and then on the ports property, you pass a function. So this is another one of these things where you guys, anybody who went to the JavaScript 101, the onMessage property, I mean, these are properties that you need to set with your function. So you need to create this property. You need to create a function with the code, the kind of stuff you want to do, and pass it to that property. So you can get this, it's a little bit confusing, all the setup, until, for me, I always like an example that works, and then I can always take that example and change it. So if you go to my GitHub account, you can get this application, you can get this example, everything is set up that works, and then you can play with it and see how it works. But yeah, these things have to be set up. I'll go right there.
Can you defer and sort of like a cron job, these shared workers?
Oh, I mean, yeah, you can do anything you want inside that shared worker as far as like,
I mean, would you just use the JavaScript set timeout to do that, or is there
well, are you talking about once the shared worker,
schedule things down the line?
you know, yeah, I know what you're talking, so once you have that request come in, yeah, you could do whatever you wanted inside there.
Just on the server, you want to mention they need to call wait after if you're doing any sort of timeouts, right?
Well, on mine, so it depends. You know, when you call the shared worker, it depends. Like, there's a lot of different options. Sometimes you call a worker and you want to get the response. You can actually set up a two-way communication. In this example, I have request handler. The Wakanda, the onSave is basically in your Wakanda request handler, right? When somebody hits save, you know, it's going to do that. I pass a message off to shared worker. That thread, that request handler ends. It sends a response back to the client. That's not the only way you might want to use shared workers. You might want to have a two-way communication, like Greg said. And there's some examples in the documentation, but you have all kinds of options. You can set up situation where the shared worker does something and sends a response back. So the other, like Greg said, then you have to have the caller wait for the response. In this case, I'm not waiting. I send that message off to the shared worker. I don't know what it did after that. I'm hoping it sent the email. If it didn't, you know, it didn't get sent. Tom and then Walt.
Yeah, can you come back to the other page?
Where I called it?
The on-save one?
Oh, the ons, you mean the,
Yeah, that's the caller.
you, oh, the code.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Right there.
Right there. So you create, every time it's on-save, you create a new shared worker.
No, the code looks like I'm creating a new shared worker. What happens in that code, if you try to create a shared worker with the same signature, which means the same path and name, if it already exists, it does not create a new one. It gives you a reference to the existing one.
Oh, so you can create multiple instances of this, daemon.js just by changing the name.
Oh yeah, you can create as many of these as you want. If you reference one, like in this code, that, you know, that looks like it would create a new one every time, it doesn't.
And it starts at port 0. That's probably why you have, so the next time you create an instance of this, I bet your port, it is returned as port 1.
I don't know. I mean, that's why, you know, I have this thing working, and I haven't explored shared workers to their full extent. I mean, there's a lot. There's dedicated workers that die with the parent thread. You can communicate back and forth, as Greg mentioned. This gets you your foot in the door. And a real example that I came across where I needed it, because when I first wrote PTO and I would send out the email from the server, it was blocking the server, and my response was, you know, not acceptable. So this was a Walt.
Is there a way to see these shared workers? Like, I'm coming from 4D, we can see profit
Yeah.
on the server. Can we
On Wakanda right now, I don't know if there's any tools to show the different threads. I know in 4D I'm familiar with what you're talking about. I don't know, do they have any server tools to show that? I don't think we have that yet, but
So how much memory
shoot,
they're waiting, so it's not
yeah, it's in a, if you have a shared worker, it has a thread that exists, and I don't think it takes up too much memory though, that one, but, well, the mail instance, when you create that, I don't know how big that is, but yeah, right now we don't have tools. That's a good thing to mention too. That's a Laurent question. So, I don't want to take up all the time. I know Greg would love if the more time I take up. I'm going to get to one other thing I want to show you and then let Greg show you some stuff. So, request handlers. So let's look at that. I'm going to shut off some of this. I don't know if I demo init. What's this? No, that's not it. The request handler, I'll just show you in the real application where I use that. So the request handler I did create on startup. Oh, and I have a couple. Oh, that's not, I don't want that. Where's my on startup? Okay. I've created a couple. I've created something called Echo, and that is in, so all my request handlers are here. So here's Echo. Oh, that's doing something different. I'm going to actually comment that out, change it. I think I have to restart the server. So I have all my request handlers in this, and I have one that I'm really using in the application, but we'll play with this one. I'm going to shut some of these things off. I don't need that anymore. I don't need that. Okay. So here's a request handler, and this is the function to create a request handler, and it's got some parameters. The first parameter is a regular expression that will match a URL, and you could get very complex. My knowledge of regular expressions is minimal, but I can go to the book. But then you just give it the file where your function exists and then the name of the function. So we've set up a simple one. So if I run this project, that is not the project, that's from before. We'll clear our cache out. And I got this, so let's, and wait a minute. This is PTO. Run the project. That should run. So there we go. So now, if I run, I have a request handler that's looking for this, and it just sent that, whatever that is. I guess it's just like the request. But I could have it, do something more interesting. So, do I really have to start these again? So, oh, that was when I was testing some different stuff. You know what? Oh, I see. I had set up this example here. Maybe we'll look at that. So, instead of doing that, let's do this. So we get our request, and I'm going to set my response to be just text. And then I'm going to look at the request. And what am I doing here? It's been a while since I looked at this. I am looking at the request, and then I'm looking at some parameters I can send in, and if I have more than a certain number of parameters, I actually style this HTML text. Let's just go try it. Anyway, the point is, in your request handler, you can do whatever you want. And I'll show you, after we do this, I'll show you the real one. So, it sits there and waits for a request that matches it. And then it does something and sends a response. It's for, yeah, because you have your regular Wakanda application, and of course when you click on your page, it's sending requests, and Wakanda is automatically set up to handle those. But say you want to handle a different type of request. And I have an example in PTO of that. I had a situation where I'd send the manager an email, and I put a link in there so that he wouldn't have to log into PTO. He could just click that link. That link would go to my request handler, and it would go load the PTO record and authorize it and save it so that he didn't have to. And I'll show you that. That's a better example. Oh, what time is it? God, I took all Greg's time. Okay, we'll show this real quick. And so if I put echo/red/14, my response is in red. If I put this to black and 32, so my request handler is set up to get those parameters and send something back. And here you go, one last thing. I'll go to the real app. God dang it. So this is not I'm going to shut this down now. So here's the real PTO app. I'm going to do a new request. Send it to my boss. Close that, get ready to get out of here. So that request is coming in to, is it here? There it is. Nope, that's not it. Here it is. Now, right here is, you can see that PTO.com. I set up a request handler called PTO approval. I have the PTO number, and if I click it, that request handler loaded the record, set the status to authorized, sent this back. I'm done. Greg, you're up. Yes, okay. I lost it.
Recommended way to set up public-facing APIs?
Well, there's, no. Yeah. There is an interesting thing, a session I saw yesterday about implementing hashtags. And did you see that session yesterday as well? Because that's a whole discussion that I think.
Okay, can you hear me? All right, screen's up. Okay, I'll whip through this. One thing I wanted to add to David's talk on shared objects, or the shared workers, is that is the most effective way to take advantage of a multi-core machine as well. So if you want to see performance increases for things like imports or really intensive functions, the way to do that is to create shared workers and break it up that way. That's the way the multi-threads will take most advantage of the multi-core servers, okay? So, where am I here? I am missing my mouse. There it is at the side. Okay. So let's get started here. I'll go real quick. Mine are not quite as technical that I'm going to go through, so lesser known features. I'm going to start with the progress indicator. Basically, this is a widget it's a great interface item that I think you need to not ignore. For a long time, you know, Wakanda's quite responsive, but I think if there's anything that your user has the time to click something else during processing, I think you need to consider having a progress indicator. And what it is, it's a widget that will check back to the server and update them on what's happening, okay? So I'm going to, there's, you know, ideal use cases, which is longer running processes. You know, it can also be used maybe not as a main interface item. You could have a side element to your application and have a progress bar running while they're still working on other parts of your application. So it can be for background processes and that type of thing. So the moving parts. You've got the progress bar widget, you've got the progress reference, and then you've got the server-side script that progress reference is going to talk to. So you basically, the way it's wired together from client-side to server-side is a progress reference. It's a unique string that you set up. So I'll give you a quick look at some code. So this is the server-side code. So you've got a function that's a slow executing function. Could be doing anything. I'm just doing a loop. So your code on the server, what you want to put in is set up the progress indicator. You set up the lots of loops is, okay. So the thing you need to do is you need to set up a value that's going to be a counter, essentially, to give the progress bar reference for the scale. So that's what the lots of loops is. So you're setting that up. There's a middle message. There are different parameters you can put in there. So this example is going to say you're on value 1 out of however many, and it's going to count up as you go. The true, that's if it's cancelable. So you can cancel the loop, the server-side script from the client. So if you've got a progress bar going, there's an option for you to make it clickable that you cancel the process. And that's what the true does. So in the center here, as you're going through the loop, each time, this is how you check. So you're going to, this right here without the, so if anyone knows, this is JavaScript, basically gives you the opposite value. Okay? Thank you. So the exclamation mark gives you the opposite. So what this is doing is saying the prog.setValue is giving the progress bar on the client the new value. Okay? And it's also returning whether there was a cancel request. So what I'm saying here is, if that value, and it sets it, is false, go in and break out of this function. Okay? So that's what you see on the server. And the one to really look at is this, my progress reference, because that's how you're going to wire it up to the client side. So on the client, there's 3 basic things you need to be aware of. Start listening. That's basically going to invoke the widget to start listening to the progress. I did that twice. Yeah, one of them's supposed to be stop. Yeah, okay, the second one, that's supposed to be stop. So you've got start listening, stop listening, and then break. And what the break one does is if they click that button and you send that, it's going to break the progress, or send that break message to the client or to the server to stop. The other thing that's interesting about these progress indicators is if you close the browser window, reopen it, and reference the same progress reference, it's going to be at the same spot. It stays live on the server, so it remains that way. So let's do a live example. So what I've done here is I have a component here, and it looks like this. Open. Okay, anyways, it's a progress, it's just basically a progress indicator. Why isn't that opening? Something screwed up with my mouse. Anyways, let's run it. That's the most fun anyhow. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I've got a slow function, and all it's going to do is delay for a certain amount of time. And 100 is going to give us a good amount of time to take a look at it. So I'm going to click run. I've already started listening. I'm going to click run. This is what a progress indicator looks like by default. You can style it and everything like every widget. And if you want to cancel part way. So in this case, I did modal style for the load of the component, so it locks everything out. That might not be the use case every time. You may, like I said, want to have different elements. But it doesn't update real time. It's sort of on a, so there's a look at a short one. Okay. Now I'm really cruising. All I'm going to say about progress indicators is there's a little bit to wrap your head around, but it's not too bad, and it's definitely worth it from a user interface perspective. Canvas widget. This is a really simple widget. It's basically a wrapper for a canvas. And canvas is a topic that's very complex. And I'll leave that to you to figure out, but I'll give you a quick little demo of some things you can do. Primarily, I think drawing is the main attraction to Canvas. So what I've got here, I'll show you some of the code behind this so you can see what Canvas code looks like. So I've got sliders here that are setting a shadow, and we're going to draw a few objects. So I've got, the first thing you do is I'm declaring the canvas object here so I can just use it. It gets reused. So you need to declare the object, then you get into things like this. So this is what it looks like to draw a circle. Okay. This is actually implementing the settings we have. So the first thing this is doing is it's taking sliders and that type of and the buttons to decide what it's going to draw. I've got it specifying some shadow, blur, offset, and that type of thing. So if we run this one, first thing I'll do is clear it. So let's set up something with a small blur, a little bit of offset, and let's do a rectangle. Oh, sorry. Yep. So this is just, and again, Canvas is a topic on its own. That you can do whatever you want. But basically, this is giving you the widget API wrapped around a canvas for you to work with. So all this is doing is setting up the canvas call, and then I'm going to call that circle. I'm going to call the rectangle. Oops. Okay. So Canvas is really interesting if you're into multimedia, if you want to do dynamic images and these types of things. But it's a pretty hefty topic on its own. See what else we've got here. Mutex. This is a really easy concept to understand, but I don't think a lot of people have read about it. And that's the best way to find out about it is just go to the documentation. Essentially, yeah, they're not only for mutants. It's a way of giving a function exclusive access to something on the server. So if you're writing to a file, would be a good example. Something that if more than one thread try and do, it's going to create an error. A mutex is probably a good place for that. And what it will do is until the mutex gets created, and I'll show you in the documentation is a pretty easy example, right? I would just read through this. This is one where they're creating a log file. And take the time to read it. A mutex will sit there, give you exclusive access to the file. When it releases, the next one in line will come in. Yeah, essentially. Yep. Yeah. So we're pretty much done, but who's looked at transactions yet? Super easy. There's three commands to them right here. All you're doing is in your JavaScript, you start with start transaction, and whatever you put between that start transaction and happens at either commit, which will commit the whole action, or roll back, it's that easy. So it's a start, it's a finish. And you can put it inside a conditional code. So you can say test this, test that, and either roll back. Where I used it a lot was in the custom login, because I was writing to different data store classes, during the registration, creating an account. And if anywhere along there it broke, I just roll it back, and it was easy to go. So we'll go into questions, yeah?
Do you think, you may not know this yet, but do you think the transactions will be limited to only Wakanda and not the external data stuff coming, for example, 4D access?
I would say it's probably going to all roll in. It sounds like he's taking a very holistic approach. If you can do it in Wakanda, that's happening in all of it. You know, there will be some slight incompatibilities, but so far it looks like he's keeping a lot of this pure. Yeah. So, any other questions? Okay. Well, we got Q&A with Laurent, I think, so let's go. Okay, sorry. Yep.
The progress bar indicator you showed earlier, so it's in the standard library of widgets?
Yeah. It's drag and drop, and it's once you get your head around it once, it's pretty easy.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Thanks, guys.